Okay, welcome to The Reason We Learn. Hello, hello, everyone. I am your host, Deb Philman, and I am welcoming to my show today, Christina Laster.
Hi.
One moment. I'm getting an echo myself. You have an echo?
I do not hear it.
Okay, we're good. So Christina is joining us, and Christina is a civil rights activist and humanitarian, and she serves as director of policy and legislation for the National Parents Union, and is also a homeschool mom and grandma, right? Also,
Yes.
former public school employee for many years. And I welcome you. How are you today?
I'm doing good out here in sunny but hot California. Anyone that is aware about Palm Springs, that's where the heat is. So if you're looking for heat, definitely come to Palm Springs.
Yeah, it's like desert there, right? Pretty
Yes.
much. Okay.
We had some record breaking heat, and it was 122 degrees, and it hasn't went very far down from that since it broke the record. So
Oh my gosh. I don't think I would be functional in 120. Well, is this where you say, but it's a dry heat? It's a dry heat.
No,
Oh,
I'm not
no?
gonna explain it or excuse it away. I'm a San Diego, California native, and I like being closer to just cool weather, period.
Right, right. I like rain. Not every day, but I like it enough that, it kind of cools things off. And we have some today, so I don't mind it that much. It gives me an excuse to stay in. I don't feel so bad.
Yay.
So, thank you for coming to talk with me today. I do sincerely appreciate you taking the time. What I wanted to start off asking you, because you are a homeschool, not just a homeschool parent and grandparent, but you're also a proponent of what you call self-determination in education, which homeschool is a piece of. Could you explain to the audience more about what brought you to this viewpoint and value, and how'd you
Yes.
get here?
So, my grandmother was a school teacher. And so we were always around public education and just education. My family is one that values education greatly. And, just watching it over my life, how many educators were in my family, of course, it was automatic for me to as well value education. So as a younger child, I was a part of the early childhood education programs. And then, I was one of the fortunate children that was able to attend Gate and Magnet. And I had to travel hour and a half almost each way from my neighborhood to another school. And I was a kindergartner, like if you could think about that, like you're in kindergarten, you're traveling an hour and a half to a quality school, right outside of your neighborhood. And then how does that look on your way home? And my thought as a child was, what about the other kids? And I don't know if other children were thinking that way, right? I was like, when I would go to the lunch court and then I would have talks with my friends outside, because we played outside after we did our homework like normal kids, and I would hear about their just miserable playground stories and their miserable lunch stories, and I'm like, but that never happens at my school. What about the other kids? And there's room on this bus. How come they can't go? I didn't know I was chosen for a specialized like Gate program in school, and they couldn't go. And so just over the years, that question kept arising. And as I continued in my educational journey, I had a totally separate experience from what the kids in the local neighborhood did. And I wanted to save them. I really did. I remember the 6th grade. It was one of those moments where I won a statewide competition, and we got to spend the night at the Reuben H. Fleet Science Theater. And I don't know if people know what that is, but it's an awesome, amazing experience. And being there, just feeling tragically happy, but then sad at the same time, because why weren't my friends able to go? And how come they couldn't win, and it was just, it ended up ultimately separating me from people in the community, because our experiences in education were so different, and our outcomes ended up a lot different. And, really, I went back to that same early childhood education center. I had graduated a year earlier than my peers and got into private Catholic University, University of San Diego. I'm an alumni. And I went back to go work at that early childhood education center, fresh out of high school. And I saw the same experiences. And so I'm thinking, I can fix it if I just like early intervention. I'm there every day showing up for the kids, like I took my job seriously, even if other people didn't. Ultimately, I went to go work for special education, and that unfortunately was the most devastating, horrible place. Seeing what was happening and how there was just no expectations. Kids were just mistreated, and my mind and my heart couldn't handle. And so ultimately I resigned because I was trying to fight from inside. And it wasn't working because I was going against the grain and people were not happy. They just wanted it to just be the same thing year after year and nobody question it and just do what you're told. And I was not that person, right? Mm-hmm. I wanted to know why these kids are not diploma bound. Right. Why were they classified this way? Because it seems like it's not accurate. Some people were misplaced, but you weren't supposed to ask those hard questions. And so I longed to see something different, but I knew I wasn't going to see it there. As I began to have my own family, now this is like decades, right? And nothing changed. Absolutely.
Despite probably a lot of talk about change throughout that process, right? Every year, like if we just have more money, it'll change. If you just give us this, it will change.
Right.
But no change.
No change. Okay. And for those of you that don't know, I have 4 children, a 27-year-old, one that will be 24 in a couple of days. Shout out for adult children. I'm always glad to announce them. And then I have my 2 younger children, 15 and 10, and I have 3 grandchildren. And so I've watched education from my experience, and then also as a mom, and now as a grandmother. And I had to ultimately say, after I fought this hefty duty battle with my youngest children over small things, meal accommodations. Okay. If a child has allergies, why am I fighting for 2 years for the district to accommodate that? Right. Mm-hmm. And it's almost like they blamed my child for having a severe citrus allergy. Right. And how many doctors do you guys really need to talk to? And then when my son, what was really the ultimate was that my son was mistreated because of his juvenile diabetes. And I sat there and I thought, wow, I had a similar fight with my adult children. Enough of this madness, right? I had chosen to pull my adult children out of school during the time that I had a similar fight. But I'm thinking, you know what? It's way later, 5 years later. Let me go the kids should be fine. Right. No way. So that was just a culmination of just events and just me looking over my lifespan of, wow, these many children have been failed. Yep. And I am smart enough to teach my own kids, and I don't got to fight myself about their allergies or meal accommodations or whatever. And so I cannot risk losing my own family in the hands of people that just don't seem to care.
And I'm going to guess that all of that fighting took hours and days and like years off your life, as far as just the amount of stress for you, for your children. It's got to be incredibly stressful to think about your child possibly having allergic reaction just by eating lunch or something like that. And so one thing that I've heard from people who say, well, I couldn't possibly homeschool. It's so much work. And I think to myself, are you factoring in the work of sending your child to school? It doesn't go minute rice perfect for most people. So what you're illustrating that point. And if your child has any special need whatsoever, something like an allergy or all the way to, they need extra help with their reading or anything else, you're now battle scarred because you have to be the advocate.
Yes, and I'll tell you what lengths I took to try to fight for my children while they were in a traditional district-run school. I had lawyers, okay, just for you guys that think it's easier, and they didn't respect the lawyers. I had specialists, and they didn't respect the specialists. I had 504s and IEPs, and they didn't respect those. My daughter carried an EpiPen. They didn't.
And that's against the law. Like that, there's IDEA, and that's federal law.
Right.
And they still, but you're the enforcer. There's no oversight to enforce it, right?
I went to board meetings. I formed parent advisory committees. You name it. I even volunteered there 3 times a week. Brought in the Meet the Masters art program.
I love that.
Like, you know, like, here, let's bring in the Meet the Masters art program. Maybe that'll inspire some. And, you know, as I did that, and as I was there 3 times a week, my fight got harder with them. Like, they just did not want to respect what was in, at that point, a 504, federal 504, section 504, that it's illegal to not accommodate, right? And they didn't want to respect the IEP for my son. And I was, you know, thinking, this is ridiculous. I can't do this. And when I left, there were tons of parents that were like, Christina, we just need to know what to do, because we're experiencing the same thing and they're treating us the same way. And, you know, I got tired of the settlement agreements for the IEP. Like, we just did a settlement agreement and you're failing a month later, right? Like, when is this going to stop? You know, why aren't you in compliance? Why aren't you following the rules? Here is your own board policy. Here is IDEA. Here is federal section 504. Here is the doctor's accommodation notice. It's plain right here. So I just figured they didn't want to do it. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't change their behavior, but I could definitely change mine. And so I started training parents how to change their behavior. Because we can't change systems behavior. We need to change our behavior, and we need to understand that our kids are not going to get another chance.
No, they don't have another chance to be that age, that, you know, that learning window, especially if you're talking K through 3rd grade. You know, if they don't teach reading correctly, your child could end up being labeled, you know, for special ed, and they shouldn't have been. You know, it's not neurological. Whereas if they were doing it correctly in the first place, you would be able to more quickly spot the actual neurodiverse kids, get them the help they need, and the other kids who might end up later marked, you know, special ed or put it there, they wouldn't be there because they'd know how to read. Right? I mean, have you seen situations like that?
I mean, they were so busy fighting me over meals. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, now what about the outcomes you're producing? But like, because my child is so concerned about an orange in the classroom, how can they even learn how to read it right?
Sure.
You know, like,
too much stress.
People don't connect those things, right? Like, it's yes, there is the component of academics, but then you actually have children that have health issues that hinder or impede upon their ability to do things in a normal, uniform, and basic way.
They're the words.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I want you to explain, because I can almost guarantee you that a lot of people in the audience watching this, or even on the replay, don't connect those words to, you know, they hear uniform, basic, and go gloss right over it. Explain what that means and why that's not good enough.
Uniform is basically one size fit all, right? Mm-hmm. Cookie cutter. Like, we're just going to treat this like a manufacturing plant. And you know what? If something happens, too bad, you know, because the kids should be able to basically adjust to being treated uniformly. I tend to think differently. I mean, every single one of our children is created uniquely, is different in their own way. They all have different and various learning styles. And I just don't see government-run schools able to accommodate that because they operate under a cookie cutter. Everyone's the same. And if you don't, you better get in line. And if you don't fall in line because you need some kind of special help or just learning according to your own modality of learning, then you get penalized. There's going to be a consequence and you're going to pay, and your child pays for being unique. Your child pays for if they have a disability, if they can't read or write normally and they're dyslexic, right? Which is different than other children would be able to read and write. Your child will pay for being diabetic. Your child will pay a hefty price for being a kinesthetic learner. Okay.
Or even just having a need to physically move, which, we have seen even in the difference between, let's say, boys and girls. And I know it's stereotypical, but let's just go with it because it tends in the early grades. There's a tendency, boys are a little more active, right? That the school is structured currently around not being like that, not having a lot of outdoor time, not having a lot of time to physically move in space. And also it's ableist. By definition, this idea of the uniform basic, you're sort of starting with the premise that like everyone is able and let's go.
Right. Right. The unfortunate thing was that my son was in kindergarten when he started really having really spontaneous high blood sugars or either low blood sugars. We don't know, until you're in a situation. And how many parents enter their child into a school at kindergarten not knowing that perhaps there's a problem, right? And so it wasn't until maybe first grade that, he finally got his diet and exercise down and he learned to move every 15 minutes, right? Because that's what we taught him to do. But at school, because they only know how to do things uniformly, it was a problem because he had to move every 15 minutes. And even though the endocrinologist wrote a note, right. It wasn't respected. And when I started talking to other parents whose kids were like in middle school or a little bit older than my son, just to try to get a feel, guess what? This was the norm for the school. So that's their basic type of education, but that's harmful to the child.
Right. And I think that's something that people struggle with is when you think of a government provided service, typically we think of things that are safety nets. It's kind of like that's there in case there's no other option, right? But for some reason with school, it's different. We think of it as like it should be, we're expecting it to be as good as it should be because there are children, right? And education is the most important thing they need in their lives next to healthcare, right? But they can't do it. Like that's just not in their ability. It's not in their skill set as government to deliver the highest quality that your child could possibly get. It's just to give them something that is uniform and basic. And they can't. Yeah. And then if they promise you they're going to do better, they're promising you something they really can't do. It's not.
That's true. And
nothing they can do.
A lot of parents are not aware when they're enrolling their children in a government-run school. Like the traditional district schools are like, I consider them another branch of government. Okay. Bottom line. And I don't know how you're working in those other realms of government. But the expectation needs to be that. And a lot of parents are not aware that there are special interests working against your child's interests when you enroll them into a traditional district school, right? They're working overtime to make sure that their interests are met, their fiscal interests and requests are met, and that our children are not priority on that list. Okay. And I don't care what anybody tells you. If you see, something doesn't seem right, like around reopening or whatever, there are collective bargains and negotiations being made without your awareness about what is going to happen to your child. And that's something that needs to be, made aware as part of your decision-making processes.
Yeah, the incentives are different than yours, radically different than yours.
Right, exactly. And so people have to be aware that there's programs that are denied because of collective bargaining and negotiations that are made and you don't even know about it. And it could be beneficial to your child, right? There is science-based curriculum that could be utilized, but you're not having access to it because of special interests, lobbying efforts, saying, no, we're not going to use that, whatever it may be. And so we have to become parent lobbyists, just to be really honest with you.
No, you're right.
To disrupt the norm around what is happening. Because one thing is that even though I homeschool and I keep my kids home, I don't trust that the government runs schools with my kids, and reasonably so. I still fight for other children.
Sure.
And so.
Well, because even as a parent who homeschools, I mean, I'm going to assume that you're for school choice, or for the idea that dollars should follow students or something along. Okay. So if there were more stiff competition and more options and people could get the education their individual children needed, they would all be well served. So in fighting for the other kids, it's all part of the same battle, right? You're just saying we need to put these kids first, wherever they happen to be. And if you keep doing that in general, then, who knows, maybe they get to act together and do something better in the school as a safety net. But if they could get the dollars to follow the kids where there are parents to spend the dollars, even the kids who are remaining in the system, first of all, there'd be fewer of them. Maybe they could do a better job and so on. So, I mean, right now they're crowded. It's too big a job. It's too much. And they try to do too much too within that realm, I think.
It's interesting to even call it the public education system anymore, right? Like, what kind of education is this? What is going to be the outcome? And I feel like children enter one way and come out a way they were never created or intended to be. Like, that is structural, harmful.
Agreed.
Exploitation of our children, right? Like, there are some things that I would never do in my home or in my family that is happening in the school, right? Like, there's just things that you have to question. Where is the social academic value at with this?
Can you give us an example? Like, give us an example of something that you see being done where you're like, what? Like, why are you doing that?
Most of the things that I have had a huge problem with was the way that children were being penalized for expected behaviors in their age group, right? Like, why are you making a kid lose their whole week of recess because they were tapping on the desk with their pencil during, instruction time, or because they kept throwing something away in the trash because they got to move, or because I've seen even where children were forbidden from going to the bathroom, right?
That's just child abuse, straight up.
Well, that's what I'm saying. There's things that happen that I wouldn't even do in my home to my children. Like, I wouldn't say you can't go to the bathroom or you're going to get punished. And they're 7. If you were to check the amount of bladder infections for first and second graders, you wonder where would that come from, right? I've also had an issue over people that, are relying on the meals program. I wouldn't feed my kid half of the stuff that they put in front of the children, right? And so there are some things that I really, really question, and where people might consider that they're small, but they impact our children lifelong.
Oh, they're not small either. I mean, I remember a case of my daughter when she was in elementary school. I homeschooled my 2 older kids up to a point, and my younger one had to go into kindergarten because I got divorced and had to put them in school. But she came home one day in tears because of a similar situation where she had been asking a classmate what the teacher had said, because the teacher had placed her as far away from the teacher as possible, with her back to the teacher, so she couldn't hear the directions. And she was too afraid to go ask because she didn't want to get in trouble. So she whispered to the kid across from her, "Can you tell me what the directions are?" And for speaking, she had to write some kind of reflection sheet. She was like in first grade. She had to write all kinds of things. She missed recess. She had to walk laps in the heat.
Yes.
It was
My
like,
son had to pick up trash.
yeah, and she's walking around for like 15 minutes. Everyone else is playing and she's walking in the heat doing laps with the teacher because she asked a question. And that's like, what?
I know.
And I didn't hear about it. That's the thing parents don't know, is that your kid doesn't always come home and tell you. So they suffer, and they suffer these little daily indignities, and you may not know about it until your kid comes completely unglued at home sometime, and you kind of work your way back following the breadcrumbs to find out why they hate school, why they don't want to go, what's going on, and then you find out what's been going on.
So that's exactly what happened to my son. And for those of you that, you know, have children in a traditional school, even watching this stuff happen to other children impacts them. And I'll tell you why. My son, you know, was treated that way and worse. And he started kind of like just having a blackout moment, right? In the days that I was there, I didn't see any of that, though the teacher would never allow me in the classroom. That's the only class that I couldn't volunteer in, surprisingly, but not surprisingly, because she didn't want me to watch her torturing children. And I'll call that it exactly as I see it. That's what she did to those children. And so it was the other parents that stopped me outside and saying, Christina, our children are disturbed by what's happening with your son in the classroom. My son's having nightmares. And, you know, the one couple parents said, my son's having really bad dreams, crying about what is happening to Daniel. They're only in first grade. We went to the principal and they told us, it's not your kid, mind your own business. And that's when I hired a lawyer. I'm just going to be real honest with you, but a lot of parents can't, right? And
it's fine for them to say, considering none of them are their kids, and yet they take liberties with these kids all the time as if they're theirs. And as you said, they treat them worse, way worse than you ever would on your worst day with your child.
Yes, I wouldn't even leave my child with a family member that treated them that way. Right? Think about that.
No way.
Like, my child can't even be with a blood relative who treated them that way. And I wouldn't care. I wouldn't look back. I wouldn't think twice. And so if you have a child that is 6 or 7 years old and 30 minutes feels like forever to them, what does 6 hours of that kind of treatment feel like to them? They have no way out, and that impacts them and develops them during their social and emotional developmental stages in a way that it's very hard to undo, right? My son's in 5th grade now. He's still, you know, has some issues that we're working on based on his experiences from kindergarten to 3rd grade in a traditional government school.
Now, when your son was going through this and you got involved, did your son at any point, he was quite young, so maybe not, but just in case, at any point did he say, Mom, please don't do that? Like, you know, don't get me in trouble. Was he concerned about retaliation? No. He wasn't? Okay, good.
He was not. Okay. As a matter of fact, he was wondering why it was taking so long. Like, every day, like I asked him to start keeping a journal, you know, and when he would tell me stuff, and I would report it back, he was wondering why it was taking so long for they called the teacher the Wicked Witch to be gone. Like, why is the Wicked Witch still hurting kids? And this is what the kids were calling her, you know, even the older kids.
Frozen.
Am I frozen?
No, you're not. There was like a moment there where I think we were both and here we go again. It's like buffering or something. I don't know what's going on. So, okay.
I'm sorry about that. So
No, it might be me. I don't know.
So my daughter, who is 5 years older than my son, she was still at the school when he was like in 1st, 2nd grade, right? They went to this, even her friends were saying the lady is so evil, right? They were traumatized from this person. And, you know, they couldn't say I wasn't involved because I had spearheaded so many volunteer things. They couldn't say that I didn't care because I obviously was coming to advocate for my son and my grandson who was there. I attended all the meetings and everything, but nothing was enough. Nothing was enough to get them to treat my child right. And so day after day, and finally, it was the therapist that said, get him out of that school now. I'm fearful of his life. I'm fearful of him having suicidal ideations, and it's not him, it's the rest of them, because I had her go do in person, kind of like sit in and find out. She's like, Christina, it is not him at all. Don't ever think it's him. It's them. They don't understand him and they mistreat him. Get him out of there. And I pulled him out, and I never looked back. I had to make up in my own mind that this harm happened to my son.
Right.
And I did everything that I possibly could. And I don't know why I didn't think about it sooner, but he was still in 3rd grade. And I said, you know what? I'm going to recoup all of this time. He's staying home. And this is protection and sanctuary. I pulled my daughter out.
Is the teacher still there?
Yes.
See, that's the other thing I think that people don't really understand, is that keeping good teachers is hard, and getting rid of bad ones is even harder. It's
super hard. I filed complaints with the teacher licensing certification board. I took it to the Office of Civil Rights at the U.S. Department of Education. I took it to USDA even, because he, did have, meal accommodations. Like, I did everything that I possibly could do within my power. Besides, like I said, I ultimately had to hire an attorney and make sure that there was some ramifications for their actions. But the thing about it is that he wasn't the only one. Right.
So you're right back to your childhood, feeling like, I want to get the other kids. I want to save the other kids too. Yes. Now, somebody's asking in the comments, was this in San Diego? This is
in Riverside County.
Riverside County. Okay. Just checking where this was. Obviously I'm not going to ask you to name names or anything, but
legally I can. I could talk about the story, but I can't name the name of the district. Sure but it was in Riverside County.
Got it. But like I said, just thinking back to your story at the beginning of the conversation of you, the little kid on the bus, getting pulled out and going, to a situation that was so much better for you, and wondering why not the other kids and what's going to happen to them. And now here you are as a parent feeling the same way, right? You're so glad that you pulled your son out, but you know that person is still in the classroom abusing who knows.
Yes. And that there were no.
So then, as to what you're doing.
Can you hear me? I don't know. I
can hear you. It just kind of like freezes every so often, but I can hear you.
I don't know what's going on. You frozen.
No, it's okay.
So, that really started me on the trajectory of what I do now, right? Because at that point, when I did take my kids out, I was like, I am not gonna leave these other children suffering, and without any kind of consequences coming from the state or the federal government. And I noticed it was just blatant, like, oh, well, you know what I mean? Like, everybody was finger pointing. Everyone was like, oh, we don't handle that at this department. And I started to think, well, who does? Like who handles this type of situation? The Health and Human Services Department said, we can't file whatever abuse charge on a teacher. And I was like, because the union protects them. Okay. And so the union protected this teacher all the way to the California Department of Licensing and Certifications, where she didn't even get a mark on her record about the things that she had done. And I had compiled a lot of evidence and reports, not just about my kid, about other children too, who had, like I said, issues from the harm. And they wouldn't. And so I figured, like, other parents were not even going to know that this person is doing this to children, and she does not need to be in education or teaching.
That is terrifying. You just get assigned a teacher. Like, you don't get to choose. You register your kid for school. They tell you what the teacher is. You show up, drop your child off, and you're completely oblivious to all the bad experiences anybody's ever had with that person. You got to figure it out on your own.
Right. So that's basically how I went to the local civil rights organization, and spending time with them, getting them acquainted with what was going on. And then I started really investigating the data for that school and the region. And I found so many special education complaints, like just non-compliance. And then I just found all kinds of stuff that would constitute abuse and neglect, right?
Yeah.
And so I started from the other side, from the civil rights perspective, fighting for other parents. And then I became a statewide community organizer for California Policy Center. And now I'm the director of policy and legislation for National Parents Union. But that's how it started.
Right.
Like I was like, I am not leaving these kids like this. There's no way. Yeah.
Understandable. And so one of the things that brought me to invite you on was I came across your blog post specifically about homeschooling, and it was specifically about Black homeschooling families, because I know that you're certainly not the only person of any kind of family to decide I'm done. Okay. But there is sort of, I think, a misunderstanding about homeschooling or self-determination in education, whatever you want to call it, school choice, that it's something that is either not accessible to the Black community or that Black families don't do it. It's this strange anomaly. I mean, I've brought it up on my channel before and people say, yes, but, and I'm like, no, there is no but. People have been doing this forever.
Right.
So can you explain to people how this has been going on for a long time?
It was my father homeschooled my younger siblings, and that's all they ever did was homeschool, and they graduated and they're very successful today. And out of 7 of us, all of us have a master's degree, and my younger sister has a PhD, right? And so there's all of these narratives and all of these things that are created about Black homeschoolers. And I'm like, I watched my dad do this, right? And it didn't seem weird to me. As a matter of fact, I have challenged myself of why did I even put my kids in a traditional school? Because I watched my father homeschool and I was there, as a young teenager. But it was just out of tradition, like, well, I have to go to work. It's the normal thing to, drop my kids off. And because I was a public school employee and, and then all of that. But then there's also this segment of the population that says, like, we worked so hard to get Brown versus Board of Education. And, you're resegregating the kids. And I'm like, well, why are we met with such opposition, and such like narratives just for saying, no, I want to determine. I respect Mr. Brown and I respect his choice. We all can file a lawsuit and hope, it either gets settled or reaches the Supreme Court. I respect that, but I need to be able to make my own decision about the trajectory of my children's life. And I shouldn't have Brown versus Board of Education tying me to a government-run school that has no site. Like, I think
it doesn't obligate you to anything. I mean, the fact that there is an option that was made legally available and accessible, as it should always have been, doesn't obligate you to take advantage of it. I mean, it's just, here it is, and you can use it or not. You don't owe anybody anything. These are your children. And, they're like precious, unique little individuals. And as you brought up in the beginning, they have their own needs, and it may work in that setting, but it may not. And so,
but then there were a lot of people, like, when I first made that decision and I stuck by it, it was like, your kids are going to come out weird. They're going to be in the house. They're not going to be socialized. And I said, listen, I don't want my kids socialized in the public school, because what I'm seeing is not okay. And you can, say what you want. And then there were just narratives like, well, you must be some kind of religious fanatic, or, whatever. There's all of these stereotypes and narratives that are created beyond just the fact that I want to raise children that are well-rounded. I want my children to have positive and high quality outcomes. I feel like I'm the most credible person to be able to do that for my children. I want to infuse wisdom and knowledge, not just something uniform, not just something basic, and not something that is totally inadequate and harmful, right? Like,
Right.
what better person to do that than me, modeling it for them, making sure that they know, because if I fail my kids, that's different. Right. I'm not going to fail them. And so I totally just had to ignore and shut out all of those naysayers, and people that may, for whatever reason, felt compelled to continue to keep their children in schools like that. And I just really started to just say, you know what, I'm going to do this. And then the pandemic hit. And guess what? Everybody was looking for,
it was like, Christina,
right?
Help me. What do I do? I got to do what you're doing, right?
Right. Tell us what you said again.
Right.
And so I was like, okay, not a problem, because sometimes it took a tragedy for me, to see that this is not okay. And sometimes it takes that, but hopefully our children won't suffer too long, in that kind of environment, because you just don't get that time back.
Right. Exactly. And somebody put in the comments a little ways back, I heard this weekend that the state of California will be removing, where is it? What does it say? Michael said, where is it? Come on, show. We'll be removing CBEST and CSET testing requirements for teacher credentialing. Because they're doing so awesome as it is.
Yeah, I don't think so. There's 50% of California students can't read or write on grade level, and another around 60-something% can't do math on grade level. So if that's what they're seeing as the problem is the teacher credentialing testing, they're way off, which I'm finding that they have been for quite some time, right? Yeah. Just doing the right thing. But the California Teachers Association is one of the most powerful, well-funded machines in the political sphere, right? And you'll be lucky if you get a politician or a government official in California whose pockets haven't been laced by the California Teachers Association. Especially, I've looked at their funding and I'm like, wow,
so what does that make the student if, for example, if the union is organized around preserving the jobs of the teacher and protecting the teacher jobs no matter what, and they're lining the pockets of politicians to set policy and so forth, then what is the kid in this little equation? They're like almost like a commodity.
Mm-hmm. A funding mechanism. That's it. And so, we have to, as parents and as families in this era, fiercely guard and protect our parental rights, our parental authority, and our position as parents, right? We cannot let external forces put such a hefty attack on our family and our children's rights. And if we sit and we don't do anything and we don't say anything, and if we complain and keep taking our kids back, they still win, right? And we're losing our rights. We're losing our power and our authority over our own children. And so that's a caution that I want to throw out there, because I watch it in this state and other states daily.
I've been saying to people on this channel, I've been saying, look, if you unenrolled and did your level best, maybe you create a little pod or a little micro school, or you find somebody, whatever you do to figure it out, it's going to be a lot harder to ropers. I don't know if you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me? I can. Yeah.
You can hear me? Okay. Yeah. It would be a lot harder to pull you back in than to build a wall and keep you in if you're already there. So that's, like, in other words, I feel it ebbing away. I feel they're coming closer and closer to trying to take more parental rights away. And I've been trying to advise people, like, if you have even the thought of doing it yourself, do it now and exercise that power, because that's huge power. As
Right.
you said, it's a funding mechanism. And if you do it now, that will get the attention of those same politicians who right now are leaning towards the unions.
Right.
But they still need your vote, right? In
But
theory.
see, the union utilizes their social, political, and financial capital in those ways, right? But they don't have the people power. Okay, right. So they might have the teacher power. So a lot of the teachers don't even agree with what's happening, or they don't know, or they haven't been polled or surveyed or told until after it's done.
Right.
But they have the financial capital, but they don't have the people. So we, the people, need to stand up and fight for what's right. And definitely say hands off our kids, right? But we can't do that and then re-enroll them in the same system that's commodifying them or making them a funding mechanism. It just doesn't work at the same time. And so we have to make up our minds and be determined about what is it we're going to do. Are we going to fight them over funding, or are we just going to remove their funding mechanisms, right? And then maybe they'll be like, okay, we understand that this whole thing needs to be restructured. But what I am really concerned about is that during this time, there's a lot of reshifting and things going on. And if we don't catch this moment to really put children at the center of the social value of education, it's going to be 10 years before we get another opportunity like this to do that. And so we really have to place our children in the center, and where they're focused on inputs with the money that is going in, we need to be holding accountability about the outcomes. What is happening with our tax dollars? Why are these outcomes creating illiterate children? What are you guys doing to focus on that? We need to really pay attention to those outcomes and the way the money's being spent. And that doesn't mean to look at the plan after. We need to be a part of the budgeting, right? Mm-hmm. We need to see where the money is and agree or not agree. And our voices need to be heard. And if they're not, then our children don't need to be there. Safety, protection, self-determination first, then go back and advocate for what's right.
Right. And I think it starts with parents do have to realize, and I'm sure this is part of what you do, that there is a learning curve. You need to educate yourself about what should be expected, what they're supposed to be doing, what they're not doing. I find a lot of parents don't even know what they're supposed to be doing that they're not doing. So it's like there's this whole learning curve for them to even be advocates for their children. And that's difficult for some people to access. If there's a language barrier, for example, right. If this is all new to them, whatever, it can be very challenging. So,
and that's why some of us who are knowledgeable are going to have to go in the trenches and make sure that we are actively involved. Like, I can't talk from a throne about what's happening on the grassroots if I'm not willing to go in and sit with the parents, inform them of their rights, and extract them from the harm, right? I mean, it's easy to come up with assessments and ideas and methodologies, but where the people are closest to the pain, I have to be here.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Right. And so now, speaking specifically about homeschooling, what do you recommend when those people came to you at the pandemic and they said, okay, I'm done with this? What was sort of your, like, all right, here's your pep talk, or here's what I'm going to tell you to do starting off?
So I, first of all, asked them all to calm down. And the one thing that I don't want anyone doing is teaching children from an anxious, place, right? So calm down. And what I want you to really think about is how to remove a traditional calendar from your thought process. Why do they need to be such and such an age? Like, where did that come from, right? And is that your child? I need you to take a really clear evaluation, self-assessment, child assessment, and think, is your child more mature than that? Or is your child a little immature? And then cater your day to what your child. Another thing that I talk about, because we don't operate off of a traditional calendar in my home, and people think I'm weird for that, because we're just learning all the time. We're learning all the time. Brains are meant to learn all the time, and children's brains especially. Another thing is that I don't let my children move on to another topic or subject until they master the one they're at. I don't care if that takes longer than other children or whatever. So the concept of my children being able to teach something back to me, then I know they have that clear understanding and they've mastered it, right? Another thing is just really not trying to bring the traditional public school into your home. You don't want to do that. You're not trying to recreate what could take place in the school day in your home, because that's going to be stressful. I saw all these elaborate calendars and we're going to wake up at 6 and we're going to go for a jog. And then by 7, we're going to, no.
God,
Stop.
no.
Don't do that, right?
No, you're not trying to recreate the school structure. I think a lot of people think education and schooling are synonymous, and they're not.
Right. No. And as a matter of fact, uniform types of education are just that, to create a uniform population of people that will be compliant and whatever else. We could talk about that a whole nother day.
That's like a whole other day. Yeah, we could do that.
So, it doesn't celebrate the unique qualities that your child has. So the first thing that I would advise people to do is get rid of that traditional calendar that's been embedded in your brain about deadlines and timelines and all of that. You will not be free to homeschool in a productive way if you do that. Okay. And then don't use, really dangerous measurement tools. Like, what, for an example, my 10-year-old son, I don't compare him to other 10-year-olds. If your child just won 50 spelling bees, fantastic. I'm not going to get mad or feel like I have failed my kid because he didn't win the spelling bee. You know what I mean? I'm going to look at him like, what is his strengths? Allow him to foster and develop around his strengths, but then we're also going to hone in and lean in on the weaknesses, because I need him to be a whole, well-rounded, educated individual. And so those are tips that I give.
And that's the key. What you just said is individual.
Yes.
Right. And the other thing we don't think about too much in thinking about the product or the outcome of education is a happy person.
Yes.
If you think about the school experience and the trauma inflicted and all of that, that's not a happy person. Even if they came through, let's say they managed academically, let's say they didn't have the physical trauma of the food allergies and so forth, and they kind of make it through. Does it automatically follow that they're fulfilled, they're happy, they like learning, that they come out of 12th grade saying, that was overall on balance a really good experience and I'm excited to continue learning the rest of my life? Or they're like, oh my God, I'm so glad it's over. Right?
Exactly. And they don't get a K-12 redo, right? Mm-hmm. So we're responsible for really molding and shaping our children from the time that they're born until the time that they reach adulthood. And they spend a way larger portion of adulthood than they do at childhood. So make sure that you're making the right choice. I did see a question in the chat that I do want to address, and I'm not paying a lot of attention, but I particularly was on this one. Someone was asking about how to really assess your child if you're homeschooling. But I do want to say that, there is a ruling in every state that you can homeschool. And if you don't have the funding, if you absolutely don't have the funding to do an evaluation, you can ask for that evaluation to be done at your local public school by law. Okay. That doesn't mean your child has to be enrolled. You can be a homeschooled person, but I would ask you to reach out to some homeschool networks. There are a lot of them. And a lot of more well-seasoned parents than me. I don't want anyone feeling like, concerned or unaware. My grandson is a homeschool student. He has autism, he has ADHD, and a cognitive auditory processing deficit. And I will tell you that he is scoring higher than some other students on his grade level with reading and writing. Okay, and math.
Right.
And they're at traditional schools and he's homeschooled. And so, there's a lot of fear that comes with it. But for those people that absolutely may not have the money, I usually advise that people would get there's educational psychologists that are willing to do evaluations at a small rate. And then there's other types of organizations that you can look at. But I don't want any parent to be apprehensive about not homeschooling a child just because you fear that they may have potential learning disabilities and that you may be inadequate to reach them, because that is absolutely not true.
Right. Even check with something like the Homeschool Legal Defense Association.
Yes.
I think they offer some grants, and you may be able, who knows, to crowdfund. I mean, people crowdfund for much less important things.
Right.
I wouldn't be above it. I'd be like, hey, I don't trust this assessment. It costs this much. Can you help us crowdfund? And, who knows, there might be a way to even create some ways to sponsor a child for this. I would love to see that in the future.
You can pay for the, I think it's the Woodcock Johnson or whatever on your own if you want to. So someone's asking, what does the assessment look like? It's a series of questionnaires, basically about the social, emotional, and developmental status of your child. And then, a teacher would fill out one, and maybe the doctor would fill out one. And then they have other tests that basically, what I know is utilized in California is the Woodcock Johnson.
Right.
And so that would be more of an not an IQ test per se.
Yeah.
But because it's against,
right.
It's
too young to be doing IQ, but you do get a pretty good sense of where they are in their development. And even that, interestingly, when I was homeschooling, I used Woodcock Johnson for my middle daughter, and then I was using a different one for my older daughter because she had more academic learning behind her.
Right.
But even they didn't catch that both of them were on the spectrum.
Right.
And for girls, it's a little harder to catch. They mask a little better, especially in the social component of it. They hide it better. They do their behaviors, they mimic better. Yes. But we didn't catch those till they were teenagers.
If I hadn't have been a special education educator for years, my grandson, you would not have been. And I knew, just because I had worked with a high population of autistic children. And so first grade, he was receiving services and supports because I already knew, and I knew what I was looking at. So it is challenging though. But I don't.
When they're home, you can accommodate better, even if you're not sure what it's called yet. Like, so I knew something was different with my eldest, but I couldn't put my finger on it. So, it almost didn't matter what you would have called it. I just knew that she needed something different. And so I went through a little bit of trial and error and reading. I accommodated that, and she did great. So whereas when she'd been I put her in a little church preschool for a little while when I first moved to my new home, and they kept reporting back, well, she just does what she wants to do. She won't come to circle time. She doesn't talk to anybody. She's off in the corner. And they were getting mad at her because she wouldn't do the social things. And I said, is she disruptive? Is she hurting anyone? Is she bothering anyone? They're like, no. And I said, we're leaving.
And sometimes it's because of the noise level, right? Or the overstimulation. And why are children getting punished? Because they're overstimulated, right?
Exactly.
Like, that was one of the other things that just really made me disgusted working in special education, because why are we upset at the children again? Because they're overstimulated. If I come in with these bright colors and maybe some perfume, that wouldn't work out for some of my autistic students, right? So I knew better, right? And it's okay. I'm not going to be mad because I can't do that. But that was the mentality. And so I really challenge parents to think about how that is going to impact their child lifelong, right?
Because there are skills for being a special ed teacher, but there's also a humanity component that is very difficult to train into a person. You sort of have it or you don't. It's kind of like, have you ever seen the people who work with the elderly when they're especially patients who have memory loss? That's an art form.
Oh, yeah.
Them and hospice care and people like that. You can't train that into somebody. And so finding the number of people that you need for a public institution who have that gift, it's nearly impossible. You as a parent with your maybe deficit of hard skills are still superior, in my opinion, because you have that for your child. It is your child. So you're going to have that, whereas they won't. So.
Right. And I worked with babies. I'm 2 years old, and you got to be at school for 8 hours or 10 hours because, parents were working, and, they could stay from 6 to 6. They were 2-year-olds. If they wet themselves, I'm not going to get mad. That's a normal 2-year-old behavior, but I saw people that were really upset. And I was like, why are we protecting these people around our children? Why aren't they gone?
Right. Exactly.
They're doing more harm than good,
Right. And when they're young, as you pointed out, like your son was like, Mom, why didn't you do something sooner? I didn't realize how bad things were for my eldest daughter until she was in middle school. Because remember, she homeschooled early, then she was in middle school. And she got in the car one day so upset. I said, what is wrong? And she handed me a sheet. She said, these are my bathroom passes for the rest of the year. I said, I'm sorry, what? She said, these are the only amount of times that we are now allowed to go use the restroom for the rest of the year. I have to use them wisely. And she was literally agonizing, like, I have to plan, but my one class is here, my other class is there, and how am I going to do it? And she was freaking out, like anxiety attack level freaking out about how is she going to go to the bathroom. I said, this is a violation of your civil rights. They can't do this to you. And then she got anxious about, Mommy, please don't go to the school. People will pay attention to me and then I'll be in trouble. And I'm like, what the?
Mm-hmm.
They're violating my child's civil rights, but she's just as afraid of retaliation if I try to protect her.
Yeah, because she's the one there all day and that feels like forever. And so one thing that I do want parents to really be paying attention to is their child's physical and emotional cues. Okay. If your child is sick on the way to school, is nauseated, biting their nails, pulling their hair, stomach aches when you pick them up, and they're not maybe one of those children that like to tattletale on people, those are cues that you really want to investigate because something is happening to them during the school day that is not natural and is not okay.
No. Do you think anyone can homeschool? I mean, do you feel like this is a statement that you could make with confidence?
I feel like everybody should be educating their children, right? I don't believe that parents don't have what it takes to educate their children. We were there with our children when they were born. We taught them how to eat. We taught them how to go to the bathroom. We taught them how to walk and talk and play. So what is the difference as they go along in their stages of ages and development? Why do we have this thought that someone else needs to do the education piece? You don't have to have this pedagogical philosophies and all of that. I can teach my children the Socratic method from home, right? And so we really need to take away that thought process that we're not equipped because yes, we are. We know our children better than anybody.
And even if you don't know material in today's age between technology and books and everything else, I mean, there are resources galore and they're not all expensive. Some are even free. So I think it's more a matter of finding out what the resources are, but people shouldn't feel like I need to know how to teach calculus or something. No.
In fact, I always joke around like I have a master's in business administration, but that don't mean I do algebra well. Okay. And so people automatically assume, well, you should know math. Yes, accounting and finance. And we had a Texas Instrument that did it for us too. And so what I did, and I had to be humble about it, is you know what? I need some of the other people within this homeschool space to tell me what to do about algebra. And I found a solution. And you know what? It was okay because I was honest. I'm not really good at algebra, y'all, and I need help. And I found the help that I need. And so we have to humble ourselves and realize we are a part of a society and a community. And there is somebody that is talented that can help you if you ask or if you seek it out.
And that's, I think, you just hit on something that's so important. And actually, I think one of the hidden benefits of homeschooling is you are giving, people talk about they're going to be weird and not have, socialization. They're going to have something better than socialization. They're going to have community.
Yes.
School is not a community. John Taylor Gatto used to talk about this. It's a network. At
Yes.
best, it's a network. But a community is when people actually really care about you and put your needs, first and things like that. And when you, the parent, get to define what your child's community is going to be. And this goes back to what we talked about at the beginning of our talk, where you said, I'm not a segregationist, I'm a protectionist. I want to protect my child. We all do that.
Yes.
Let's not pretend that this is specific to race or anything else.
No.
We all want to protect our kids.
Exactly.
It's not about segregating or sequestering your child away from other people. It's about self-determination and choosing the society in which your child will, you have values that you would like to pass on to your child. Why shouldn't you choose the people with whom they associate in their earliest, most impressionable years?
My daughter is an artist. As you can see, all of the art in my office is paintings that my daughter has painted for me, and I take her around other artist networks, community events and things like that. And people say, oh, well, that's fun. No, that is not fun. That is a part of her learning experience, right? And every time we go, she learns a new technique and she gets better at what she is gifted to do. Now, when she was in school, she used to get in trouble for drawing and doodling and whatever the teacher thought it was. But it was because her thoughts, she recreated them through art. And so, it's really interesting. We got to be careful about staying away from uniform, basic, factory model type of stuff, and really challenge our own thoughts about what it is that is best for our children. And nobody gets to decide that or determine that. So,
well, and then you take a child who's so interested in art, and you mentioned Meet the Masters program, right?
Yes.
And then you can channel that into let's read about some artists. And now we're reading. Let's learn the history of the time period that they lived in. Now we're doing history. Oh, let's look at how they used to mix paints back in the 1600s. We're doing science. So you can do all of it in their interest space too.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
And you can't do that in school.
No, you can't. My children know about classical music, like Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. And, my daughter asked me, do you think I could play that on a violin? Well, yeah, let's try it. It's a challenge, right? And so we have the time and ability to explore those things, whereas she was penalized for asking those kind of questions in class because it was just a disruption. You know what I mean?
Right. Exactly. So what are I want to respect your time and try to, come to a conclusion on this. What are your favorite resources that you have used for these kinds of things, like building community, finding other families to learn from and grow with? And what are your favorites?
So we have an organization called CHEA out here in California, CHEA. That's a great one, for especially parents who are considering and are getting started. You really will have a huge embrace there. And then, really also we utilized some resources from ABECA. Some parents, can choose whether or not they can afford ABECA stuff, but I found the videos and things like that to be very helpful. And then, basically just being a part of a Facebook homeschooling parent group is going to be a good resource for you because you can get on-time help, right? You can get on-time support. And so find one that suits your needs. They have one for, preschoolers, kinders, or just an overall population of homeschoolers. I even have joined homeschooling in Spanish, homeschooling in Espanol. And so you will be able to find something, but you have that on-time community of support just in case you have any questions. You can also see how they're doing things. You get neat ideas, almost like looking at Pinterest, right? And so I suggest joining an official homeschool network and then also one that is maybe on Facebook and then also other resources that you can use. But those are three that are my go-tos.
That's awesome.
And I'm sorry to anybody in the comments that I didn't get to answer your questions.
I'll scroll through and just see. There was somebody who commented, what is it about the control around the bathroom? I've asked that my whole parental life. They are very obsessed with bathroom time, aren't they, at public school?
Seriously.
Crazy.
It's almost like conditioning or something. I don't know.
Yeah, it is very strange. I think it probably started as a way to, prevent certain kinds of misbehaviors that could go on in a bathroom. But I
Right.
think it just turned into like a power struggle.
Well,
And
developmentally, we find that children are when they have a event take place, they only control their eating and their bathrooming. Children are
that's true.
aware of that. They only control their eating and their bathrooming. And so if you control their eating and their bathrooming and that's all they control, then it's kind of, abusive. And so when children have some kind of incident that takes place, you almost like can notice a regression in toileting or children like overeating or either rejecting food because psychologically they're aware that they control those things and that's all they control in their lives. So
Right. I mean, they say that's one of the sort of the causes of eating disorders is
yeah,
that it's a way of taking back control at a time in your life when you're rapidly changing and it's out of your control. So, yeah, I think it's really important what I'm hearing from you that I've sort of always known, but you express it so beautifully is being in touch with your child's mental health, like really tuning in to what they're feeling and how they're expressing themselves in ways that are not words. Like you said, the nail biting, the anxiety, the stomach aches, the I don't feel well, I don't want to go to school today, even straight up refusing that, see that as a red flag, like something
yes,
is not right. And usually by the time, at least it's been my experience, by the time they get to that stage, things have been not right for a long time.
right.
So
I talked to the high schoolers and they were angry and they would tell me, Miss Laster, you know what? When we leave school, we just go to sleep. And when we wake up in the morning, we're like, oh, we got to do it all over again. And I said, how long have you been doing this? Well, since we've been in school.
yeah, that's no kind of life. And then
Yeah,
their memory of their childhood is, and I think when you get to young adulthood and it really sinks in what you've lost,
right.
that you'll never have that time again, that's when you can get some anger issues.
Yeah.
So I think, no, I think this is really, really important. I can't thank you enough for sharing all of your thoughts and your wisdom with us today. This has been so great. I just hope that everybody, takes this to heart and realizes that uniform and basic are not good words.
No,
They're really not. If you stop and think about, is that what I wanted for my precious baby, was a uniform basic education?
no way.
Probably the answer is no. So,
Right.
yeah. So, and organizations are out there to help you, right? I mean, there are people out there to help you. So thank you so, so much for coming on. And where can people find you, or, if they want to watch your videos, because I know you have a lot of really great
Yes.
detailed videos about homeschooling, where should I send them?
So I have, a legislative corner on the National Parents Union .org. You can go and find things that I publish on the legislative corner if you want to get involved that way, or you can find me on any of my pages under Wise Society. On Facebook, I am under Let My People Think. And so definitely can find me. Christina Laster, IG, Twitter, and Facebook is where I have my videos, but most of my stuff is housed in the National Parents Union, either web page or Facebook page. Just go through the videos. I do a show called Know Your Rights, where I teach parents about their rights and education and what they can do now. And then also managing day to day. So that's how you'll find me.
Okay. I highly recommend both things because there is a lot. I watched a video that you had on there yesterday that you sent me, and there's so much great detailed information. Yes. So here we skim the surface. We were just up in here because I really want you to go there and look at the detailed stuff.
Yes.
And, just use the rest of the summer to learn. That's what I've been telling people is use this time, learn, plan, and then leave.
Yes. And that's why I like videos, because you can always, use them as a resource. If people didn't catch it then, they can still look at it. And so I welcome any of your questions as well. If you want to reach out to me through any of my social media pages, definitely do. I welcome your question.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you to everyone for coming today and for sharing this time with us. And thank you so much, Christina Laster.
Anytime.
That was awesome. Thank you. Bye, guys.
Bye.